Welcome to Writer's Life, an ongoing conversation with writers, authors, and folks in the publishing industry. I'm your host, Marvel Harrison, Publishing Director, Mimbres Press of Western New Mexico University. It is with great pleasure that I share a conversation today with someone who we've met with before, a real, true character in life, and whom I call a friend, John Fayhee. He's an award-winning writer, a hiker, and he's a great adventure seeker in life and on the trails. And I first got to know him through his work as editor of the very wonderful Mountain Gazette. And now I've had the pleasure of, really forging a relationship through your writing. And welcome to Writer's Life, John.
It is a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
And John is an author of a very new Mimbres Press book, and it is called A Long Tangent. And today we're going to spend most of this time hearing from John. First of all, John, can you share a little bit of your experiences about the baseline creation of the book?
A few years ago, I was beginning to sort of feel my age. And I had decided that I wanted to do something of relative note physically, something that would require concentration and commitment. I've hiked a lot of long trails. I've hiked the Appalachian Trail, the Colorado Trail, the Arizona Trail. And I thought along those lines, except I was not at a point in life where I could take 6 months off to try to hike the Pacific Crest Trail or something. And I think my wife would have divorced me if I'd have said bye-bye once again, see you in 6 months. So the previous year, I had, my high school reunion was coming up. And I said, oh man, I got to drop some pounds. I got to get rid of some beer gut. And so I hiked, and by the time I thought that, it was only 41 days before my reunion. So I hiked every day for 41 straight days. And that was the longest that I'd ever hiked consecutively in my life. Even when I'm hiking these long trails, I mean, you might be out for 10 days or 2 weeks, but then you come into town, take a day or two off. Up until that point, the longest I had ever gone was 21 days. And that's when I lived up in the Colorado Rockies. So 41 days, that was great. But anyway, I was sitting on a bar stool, just kind of feeling, I don't know, no direct, this happens, I guess, as you get older. I was feeling lethargic and I wanted to come up with something. So I played off the previous year's 41 straight days and I said, how about hiking 100 straight days? I think I can do that. And had a couple more beers. And by the time I left, I went out to my vehicle, it was like, the hell with 100 days, I'm going to go for a whole year. And then I got home and I was like, oh crap, because I jotted this idea down on a cocktail napkin and signed it. So I was like, oh, here I am. And the next day, I mean, there was no, when you're doing a long hike, when you're hiking the Appalachian Trail or something, you prepare for months and months. There was no preparation for this. The next day I got up, which I probably would have been hiking the next day anyway. I mean, I hike a lot. But the next day I put a pack on and got my dog Casey and we drove out to a place and had a little bit of a quest beginning ceremony. And it worked. I mean, it went, we made it 367 straight days. And the rules were, there were only 2 rules. So I didn't have any rules like I'm going to become a better person or anything like that. The only 2 rules, I mean, I gave up on that long ago. The only 2 rules was each hike had to be for at least an hour. And most of them were longer than that. And every hike had to take place out in the woods. So, I mean, I live in a hilly neighborhood. Walking around the neighborhood didn't count. I had to be in a place where I put my pack on my back, went to a trailhead and hiked in the forest. And so those were the only 2 rules. And almost all these hikes took place essentially in my backyard. I mean, I've done a lot of crazy international travel. This wasn't that. This was hiking day after day in my backyard. A few ventures to Colorado, Arizona, but this wasn't going to Namibia like I did a few years ago. This was a backyard sort of thing. So, Bear Grylls was not calling me up saying, I need some advice from you. I mean, this was kind of a pretty civilized endeavor. So anyway, I did it and kept a lot of notes, kept a lot of journal entries, scribbled on a lot of bar coasters, and then didn't really write a book about it. That wasn't the goal when I started this. And then all of a sudden the pandemic hit, and almost all the freelance writing options that I had in my life were gone instantly. So I said, this is a good time to do it. So I started collating those notes and those cocktail napkins and those beer coasters, and sat down and wrote this book. And the first draft, as you well know, was 200,000 words. And that's a little verbose.
And that's a lot of cocktail napkins.
Yeah, and a lot of memory, which my memory is not being not that good anymore either. But once I realistically started thinking, and this is my 13th book, so I've been down this road before. And I knew, of course, that 200,000 words was no chance anybody was going to publish that. So I cut it down to about 120,000 words, which is still long. And that's about when one of my best friends from college at Western New Mexico University, who's always been a big supporter of my work, probably my biggest fan besides maybe my wife, said, "Why don't you submit this to Mimbres Press?" And I said, "What's Mimbres Press?" And at the nudging of a fellow alum from Western New Mexico University, I found out about Mimbres Press and submitted it. And you guys graciously accepted the manuscript almost exactly a year ago, July of 2022.
Mhm.
And we've been toiling away on it ever since. And we've got it down, I'm proud to say, to 95,000 words, which is still long, but I'm a
Well,
gabber. So
I'm gonna ask you if you'd share with us less than 94,000 words, but an excerpt so that we can get a real full life flavor of
feel,
a long tangent.
feel for this. I'm gonna read a chapter here that's a little bit longer than maybe it should be, but this book, it's not totally linear. It's not, I took another, I got up tomorrow and went for another hike. I mean, there's flashbacks, there's references to my younger years. There's even stuff that takes place indoors, driving my vehicle. I mean, the life of a hiker. I mean, this is sort of what this is. And this piece sort of incorporates all of those things, or most of those things. And the chapters are very creatively numbered, like day 232. There's not a, and that's what they are. This is day 232. And here we go. This will take, I think, about 6 minutes. Having spent my earliest years in the northernmost part of the Adirondack Mountains, my relationship with ice began not long after my memory began to crystallize. When I was 4, my mom, then between husbands, decided it was high time that our eldest child learned to skate, lest I lose some manner of standing in that ice-dominated part of the world before I was old enough to lament the thought of being a social pariah. I was not so sure. She planned no formal lessons. That was not the way for a woman who the previous summer had taught me to swim by tossing my very surprised self off a dock into the frigid waters of Lake Champlain, then jumping in to save me when I started to sink. Once she laced me up with a pair of borrowed skates that were about 12 sizes too big. My mom flagged down a passing skater, a man she did not know. She asked him to take me around the massive municipal rink. He towered over me. He bent down and asked if I was ready. I knew it really did not matter how I answered. The next instant, I was in the middle of the biggest cheek-rippling G-force vortex any 4-year-old could possibly imagine. My body, parallel to the rink, flopped like a windsock in the man's wake. Only occasionally did my skates even touch the ice. That is how phobias are born. Also, passion. My mom told me I pretty much took to skating right away. Though I was never very good at it, especially when compared to the hockey players, figure skaters, and speed skaters that populated the Adirondacks, I found pleasure in sliding across the ice. It was a cold season substitute for walking through the woods. Then we relocated to Eastern Virginia, where what little ice there was generally took the form of those dreaded winter storms during which roads glaze over and frozen tree branches snap under the extra weight, taking out power lines for days on end. Every few years, it would get cold enough for long enough that the area's many swamps would freeze to the point that local kids could frolic on this foreign substance. Those occasions were short-lived and generally concluded when youngsters started breaking through the melting ice and sinking waist-deep in stinky muck. I outgrew my last pair of skates before high school, and they eventually got tossed. When I moved to the Colorado high country many years later, I became reacquainted with ice, for better and for worse. I bought a pair of hockey skates and spent most every winter night before bed with my last dog, Casey. We would drive to the rustic rink behind our local Walmart, where I would smoke a bowl and glide through the darkness. It was a meditative reconnection to a time so far past that it seemed more historical fiction than memory. Then, one otherwise ordinary night, I fell. Though, as noted, I have never been anything more than a basically competent skater, I rarely in my entire life have taken a spill. I learned as a child that with ice, a daring-do attitude was often followed by painful consequences. There was a half-inch of new powder covering the rink, making it impossible to see a crack in the ice. I caught the toe of my skate and went down hard, reflexively putting my right arm out to break the fall. I could almost hear the soft tissue in my shoulder tearing. Not long thereafter, while walking down a street to my office, I stepped on a patch of ice and my foot came out from under me. Picture a cartoon character slipping on a banana peel. As my posterior was making its way toward pavement again, my right arm went into instinctive protection mode. My shoulder tore even more and in more different ways. Even after 2 surgeries, that shoulder is worse than ever. When I hoist a pack, I do so gingerly. You don't realize how much you flap your arms while jumping across a creek until you do so with a lame wing. About the only good thing I can say about my right shoulder is that it is not as trashed as my lower back. Small favors. One would think that after dealing with the dark side of ice intensely enough that the consequences have come to define my life, I would assiduously avoid ice any more substantial than cubes found in a beverage glass. And since I relocated to the Gila, I have done so pretty much by default. But we got some rain earlier this winter, followed shortly thereafter by nighttime temperatures that plummeted into the low teens for several weeks. As a result, sections of numerous creeks located in shadowy canyons sported ribbons of ice several hundred feet long. I was unable to resist. Much to the consternation of my wife, who lived in the Colorado high country for more years than I did, and therefore is also familiar with the dark side of ice, my roots, combined with an apparent genetic inability to integrate past experiences into future behavior, pulled me towards those ribbons. I convinced Gay to pull out her camera, which she did very reluctantly. Then I walked to the most upstream part of one particularly enticing strip of ice. Even though I no longer desire to dwell permanently in wintry climes, I yet retain remnant strands of the skating gene. It has long been one of my travel fantasies to skate on the canals in the Netherlands, though from what I've heard, climate change has thawed that dream. I drool when I watch videos of people skating for miles on Nordic lakes, frozen deep down with ice so clear it's invisible, so it's like skating on air. This was a bit more plebeian. I got a running start and began to slide. Well, okay, slide is not the right verb. The ice was uneven and blemished with sticks and leaves. Given that it was late afternoon, it was fairly warm, so the ice was sticky. I was wearing trail shoes with aggressive tread, so totter might be more accurate. The experience, captured on digital video, was far from graceful. There were lurches that easily could have gone either way. Casey, my dog, seemed particularly worried as she followed along, her claws dug deep into the ice. It was fun in a very childish way. The older I get, the less the word fun is integrated into my existence. There are plenty of experiences that are pleasurable or satisfying, but flat out fun, that seems to have diminished as my metabolism has slowed to a crawl and my bones have become more brittle. I actually laughed. Then I walked down to the next ribbon of ice and prepared to launch yet again. This time, my wife refused to photographically immortalize my reconnection with childhood. She had recently read some manner of old people's magazine article that said one of the foundational keys to longevity is to not do stupid stuff. I tried to explain that I was not of the belief that tottering along on a ribbon of ice technically fit the definition of being stupid. She, being the arbiter of all my ill-advised behavior, did not agree and left the spousal unsaid hovering in the air. I, being an obedient husband and all, only glanced at those tantalizing ribbons of ice as I trudged by, my shoulders slumped. The next day, though, it was only Casey and me. We purposefully accessed a different creek, one that I suspected would be frozen solid. It was. I scarcely touched the trail as I tottered along on the ice, knowing full well that I needed to prepare a plausible lie in case things went awry. In case I returned home with bumps, bruises, contusions, and maybe even additional damage to a shoulder that oftentimes seems beyond repair. Something like, damn, Casey was about to plummet off a cliff, but I caught her just in time. But sadly, while rescuing our poor dog from certain death, I tumbled. Thankfully, nothing bad happened. And while on that ribbon of ice, I thought back to when I was 4 and my mom handed me off to a passing skater and I was pulled like a windsock around a rink. And for a period of time that ended up being achingly short, my life changed for the better. Gay asked how the hike went. Pretty much the same as always, I responded with a wink toward Casey, who winked back while shaking her head. One's canine companion should also be a convincing co-conspirator, a partner in crime. And that's the end of that chapter.
Well, that's one more delightful piece. And I've read that, of course, a couple of times, but I had never heard it. And I really enjoy the voice behind it. And, I could just visualize it even better hearing you share it.
I try to write conversantly. And that's actually a thing that a lot of readers say to me, that they hear my voice. It's not always possible to do that. And sometimes it's counterproductive to try to do that, but it is a process that sort of comes naturally to me. The stories I like to tell are basically bar stories or campfire stories put down on a page, or put down on a page via a laptop computer. So I appreciate you making that observation. That's something I strive to do.
Yeah. Well, you have accomplished it well, and now our readers have access to a long tangent, and we'll be doing an audio book in this format also. So I'm looking forward to that
I did
creation
not know
too.
that. I learn something every day.
Yes, well,
Good.
John, it's been such a pleasure working with you, and it's been a joy to speak with you today. And thanks to you and to everyone who's joined us. I'm Marvel Harrison, and from all of us at Mimbres Press, may your day be sparked with curiosity and wonder. See you again on the next Writer's Life.